Hey guys, it's Graham. What's crackin'? All right, tonight is a little bit less of a reading video and more of a writing video. I was cruising through the Audible catalog looking for things to add to my wish list because I definitely don't have 80 books on there already that I won't get to for a couple of years. And, on their front page, it's like, hey, we think you might like these, or here's a new series coming out. And I saw one, and just because I'm not about starting crap with people, it was in a series that started, probably 20 years ago at this point, a middle grade series. It's still going, and now we're taking a tertiary character from the original series and giving him his own front and center treatment, and making a big deal about the fact that he's part of the rainbow community, and aiming it at kids. And I just remember thinking, like, man, this author must be out of ideas. Watching what's been happening in the comics book industry for the last 10 years or so, anytime they hire in a new writer who really doesn't have a background in comics, it seems like that's kind of like the go-to card that they play. It's, okay, well, now we're going to have this character explore their sexuality. And it's like, wait, what? Why? And when every single character does that, like, it's really easy to come to that conclusion. It's like, did you just not have any ideas about where else to take this? Like, what else you can show with this? And I got to thinking kind of broader spectrum about series that go on way too long and try to answer way too many questions to the point where they stop being interesting, because the thing that they fix in the canon ends up becoming less interesting than the possibility of what it could be, than not knowing. This was a phenomena that kind of came to a head in 2018 when Star Wars released the Solo movie. I mean, Solo was a rogue character. He was supposed to be mysterious, and you generally understood that he had a rough background, a rough upbringing, and he found his own way in the world, and now he's this roguish smuggler, and not knowing the specifics is more interesting than knowing all of the details. Okay, he was a TIE fighter pilot and he sucked at it, so he's supposed to be better with a Corellian cruiser? Okay. Oh, and there was originally an escape pod on the front of the Millennium Falcon, but they used it and now it looks like this. And then Chewie was a gladiator, and Han met him in a prison cell, and all that. Like, setting aside the fact that Last Jedi was bad and it damaged the brand, or that Harrison Ford is really the only actor who should play Han Solo. I mean, those elements right there, it fixed an interesting mystery and made it less interesting. It's like showing how a magic trick works and seeing how simple it is, and then you kind of get annoyed by how you were going along with it instead of figuring it out, The mystery, the not knowing, can be more intriguing than having it all spelled out for you. Orson Scott Card, back in the 70s, published Ender's Game, which was unlike any other sci-fi of its time and had a plot twist that just freaking blew everyone's mind. For years, everyone told me I should read this book. When I finally did in 2008, and I got to the plot twist, I felt like I had seen it coming, and I wasn't sure if somebody had spoiled it for me or not. But it had been out for so long at that point that everything that came after it was kind of like inspired by it or built on it, or tried to emulate its success, ended up coloring my baseline. The thing that was so excellent for a previous generation became kind of like normal and standard for my generation. That isn't to say that it was bad. I've never gotten super into all of the other Ender books, and he's written like 30 of them. Now, in his defense, he's got an audience for it, and there are people that are very interested in all of the minutia of the Enderverse, and with it being a planet-hopping, galaxy-spanning adventure, there are a lot of different places that you can go. There are a lot of different things that you can do with it in that world, but you've got to take the scope kind of beyond Ender at some point. And because he's been writing it for so long, he's had fans that put together a wiki and help him track all the details. Like, it's impossible for him to keep everything that he's ever written over the last 30, 40 years square in his head. And he's even, admitted that he's made a couple of continuity errors here and there just because of the scope of it. That's a risk, but as long as your readers don't mind and they understand that and they're there to buy the next one, that's an agreement that he has with him and his readers. Me personally, I'm not going to read all 30-something Ender books in my lifetime. I've read 4 or 5 of them. I think they're fine. It's not for me. But there are other series that I've read where I get to a point where it's like, I didn't really need to know all of the details of this, because then the entire world becomes explored. The entire map is filled out. And what you find is less interesting than what you can daydream about. That's what gives it some of its valuable quality. It's what makes people want to come back to rewatch or reread the original stories again, is because they can go back to that world and then they can start using their imagination and they can play around with it and do what they want with it. That's what makes role-play games so successful. These massive MMOs that are constantly updating and giving new quests and new missions and stuff, because there is always something new. And it's only limited by what the players can do in it. That makes that valuable. You can't just take a narrative and limit it to the uttermost farthing. If you do that, you end up creatively exhausting your readers. The reason this is all in my mind, other than me seeing that book on Audible and thinking like, oh yeah, this writer is out of ideas, is right now I'm proofreading the 4th book in my Engines series, going over it with my wife, getting feedback from her, and thinking about the larger plans that I have for this world. It was originally just going to be a trilogy. That was my plan for it 10 years ago. And then my brain started playing with it, and I imagined, a series that happens 50 years later, a series that happens 100 years later, maybe a series that happens a couple hundred years before. And I've had to kind of temper it all by saying, okay, like, if I were to actually sit down and write this, would it be as fun as writing the original trilogy? Or would I just be committing a daydream to paper and wasting time that I could be using writing other things? And so as I've debated that over the last several years, I've decided what I am going to write, and also kind of made a list of what I'm not going to write. There will be other trilogies. I've said this elsewhere. My other readers know this. There's the original Engines of Liberty trilogy, an alternate history fantasy. It takes place in a different 1984. The book that I'm writing right now follows 50 years after that in 2034. Technology is still a little bit behind what we know today, but there's a reason for that. It's in world, it's consistent. And without really meaning to, this little one-off standalone novel is going to lead into the next trilogy, because the main character of that trilogy appears at the end of this book. I'm like, okay, I've been playing with a roster of characters and with this setting in my head for the last 10 years. That makes it easy to figure out what the pieces are on the board and move them into the right place or the right way, but not over-define it too much. For example, like one undercurrent in the Engines of Liberty trilogy is that there's a tyrannical British king. He rules the colonies with an iron fist, and one proviso that he's put into place is that the colonists don't really get to have religion. But I didn't define that too much in the series. It's just you get to a point where you realize, like, oh, none of these people go to church, none of these people talk about scripture, none of these people make an appeal to a higher power than the king, because they're not really allowed to think about one that's higher than the king. They still have old hymns like God Save the King, but they're not really allowed to study or know more about the concept of God, because they're only supposed to look to the crown as the highest power. Religion starts to make a little bit of an appearance in the 3rd book, but then there's a subtext that after the Americans win their revolution and draft their Constitution and their Bill of Rights and all that stuff, there's going to be a big religious revival, because people get to have this thing that they couldn't have before. And so I've worked that into this fourth book. There are undercurrents of faith and religion, and people are starting up different denominations, and I've had to invent a few off the top of my head, which is fine. Like, it gives color, it gives spice to the world. But if I go on too far, if I go on at length about it, then it becomes too much of a fixture, it becomes a distraction, and it just takes up too much space and too much weight in the story. I'd rather people read it and maybe let their own imaginations run wild with it, and be done with it. Do as much as they want to do with it. There will be the fixed facts of the story, there'll be the fixed facts of the characters, those things. That's the stuff that I'm really going to set in stone. But the rest of it, let people's imaginations run wild. That's why I have this saying, I sell daydreams and daydream accessories. That's really where all of my creative work comes from. It's just, I work by myself, I've got my head in the clouds all day long, and it's fun, it's delightful. It allows me to become more, as Kurt Vonnegut says. So I encourage other people to do the same, and that's an approach that I take to my writing. So hopefully you've found some value in all this. If you've got some series recommendations that you would make where the author left you plenty of room to breathe in some areas and didn't go on too far at length in others, let me know in the comments below. My name's Graham. I read books, I write books, I draw pictures for books, I sell daydreams and daydream accessories. Hope you guys will subscribe. Stay tuned for the next video. Till then, drive safe. See you out there.